No, we're gonna let we have a few hundred people who are logging in to the virtual session, so we're just going to give them a minute or so to get online. And if you need Wi-Fi access, you just go into Fordham, and there's really nothing. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the Real Estate Institute's Solving the Affordable Housing Crisis panel discussion today. We're thrilled to have you here along with many people who are tuning in virtually. My name is Andy Murray. I'm the Associate Dean of Enrollment and Strategic Marketing for the School of Professional and Continuing Studies, which houses the Real Estate Institute. And this event is part of our Visionary CCL series. And we are approaching the 250th anniversary of the United States, and we wanted to have visionary leaders such as our panel here today to talk about the major factors that will affect our country now and moving forward. And I am thrilled. Unfortunately, our moderator was not feeling well today, so our chairman of our board, Lou Mirando, CEO of Streamline Realty Funding, has generously offered to pitch in for us. This event is, as I said, part of a series. We are raising funds to support our students who are taking our real estate classes, whether that be for a master's in real estate, master's in construction management, master's in real estate development, or we have adults who are continuing and getting their undergraduate degree in real estate, as well as certificate programs and graduate certificates. Myself and my colleagues are here today. If you have any questions about our programs, we'd be delighted to speak with you. So I would like to, yes, and we'll be taking questions at the end. So if you have any questions, just make a signal and we'll come out and get you. I also wanted to thank our sponsors, Douglaston Development. The Douglaston Companies is our gold sponsor today. And I'd also like to thank our silver sponsors, Wells Fargo, Streamline Realty Funding, L&M Development, and Capital One. So thank you for your support. And as I said, that goes to support our students. So we really appreciate it. And now I will pass it over to Lou. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for showing up today. You know, Fordham has a very active fine arts theater group, and the show must go on. So this is not going to be difficult because I'm only the moderator. So I just have to ask a few questions and hope these people have a wrestling match up here, and then we'll have a lot of enjoyment here. But the one thing I do want to talk about is that I was thinking about affordable housing. We throw around the word affordable housing like it's just another thing. And I was kind of thinking about the affordable housing crisis could be at the very root of whether our union survives or it doesn't survive. And I was thinking about it, and I learned this a long time ago. There was the psychologist Maslow's hierarchy of human need. And it always stuck with me. This goes back to when I was like 23 years old. It's the one thing I think I remembered in our class was this principle. He was a psychologist in the 40s, and he groups human need into a pyramid. And the most amount of need is in the bottom of that pyramid. And he talks about like physiological needs, you know, housing, shelter, you know, avoid sickness and cold, and then it moves up to the safety needs and security. And as it goes up in the thing, it finally gets to esteem needs like prestige and feeling accomplishment. And it really wasn't lost to me that if we don't, like, if most of us have a home to go to and everything's relative and it's a happy place and we feel these needs are being taken care of, it allows us to go up that pyramid. And the thing I always didn't like is the self-actualization is like the top of the pyramid. And I promise to be non-political, but I feel like the people that are really wealthy and or the tech people or the rock stars or the artists, but like they can do that and they have no issue with affordable housing. But I think for the rest of the population is unless we start fixing these needs on the bottom of that pyramid, we're going to have a whole host of trouble. Now, with that said, I want to I'm going to have the panel introduce themselves because they know more about themselves than I do about them, but I know them all and I appreciate their coming. I'm going to start with Chris Dunn.
Thank you, Lou. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Dunn. I am a managing partner at Mission Peak Capital. We're a real estate firm based in Kansas City, but with offices around the country. We do all sectors, but by far our biggest is housing related. We don't have, I wouldn't say an affordable housing, that's capitalized affordable housing group, but the sectors that we're biggest and most active in are very relevant to affordable housing. The biggest being manufactured housing. So we're one of the larger operators across the country in manufactured housing, but we do build for rent and also conventional multifamily.
Great. And Jed from Douglaston, and just so you know, Jed works with our new chair, Ryan O'Connor, who unfortunately his wife came down with COVID. But Jed, we appreciate you being here and you tell us a little about yourself and what you're doing.
Good morning, Jed Resnick. I'm the CEO of Douglaston Development. We are full service end-to-end developers here in New York City. We predominantly build multifamily, mostly ground up, although we do some preservation work as well. And we are active in other markets around the country, but we're headquartered here and we're most active in and around the city. And we really run the full range of multifamily development for rent and for sale. We have a very large affordable housing platform that's active in new construction and preservation, senior housing, really across the board. We're active right now in with affordable projects in every borough but Queens. So we see a lot, and we do a lot of different kinds of programs, a lot of different kinds of construction.
Catherine.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine McAdams, and I work in Wells Fargo's Community Lending and Investment Group. I'm focused on originating debt financing, specifically for the construction and preservation of affordable housing, primarily here in New York City. I also manage a portfolio of deals that are in construction and in lease up. I work closely with my colleagues who provide LIHTC equity, and we most often provide debt and equity financing for transactions. And if I can give a shameless plug for our team in New York, we've financed over 30,000 units of affordable housing and have provided over $6 billion of debt and $3 billion of equity for projects here in the city.
Thank you, Catherine. And Michael LaCour, who works for Fannie Mae, he's also at Fullerton, University of California. He's done a lot of research. He'll introduce himself, and he's agreed, and I appreciate it. He's going to give us a short background on the research he's done, is where we are in terms of for sale housing and rental housing in the U.S. on a national perspective. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Michael. Thanks for doing this.
You bet. Thanks so much to the organizers for inviting me, and for Fordham for hosting this very interesting program. Again, I'm Michael LaCour Little. I'm Professor Emeritus at California State University at Fullerton, where I was a finance professor. And for the last 6 years, I've been at Fannie Mae. I'm a principal in the Economic and Strategic Research Group. So I'll give you a little bit of Fannie Mae's thinking about where the economy is going, in addition to talking about the basic facts about affordable housing and the problems we face. So let me start. There's clearly significant problems of housing affordability in both rental and home ownership markets. While those two markets are connected, let me start with the latter. So what's the fundamental problem? Well, it's really pretty simple. The United States has not been building enough housing for more than a decade. Now, there are various sorts of estimates out there, and of course, depending on the method you use, you'll get a different point estimate. But in general, the belief is among economists that we're about 3 to 5 million units short of the number of housing units that we really need. And what's the other problem? Well, this has occurred just as a large swath of the millennial generation has reached the peak age of household formation, marriage, and typically home ownership. So first-time home buyers are out there in force, and with their demand, and they're encountering limited supply, and that's what drives up prices. There are related issues. Baby boomers, as it turns out, and I count myself as one, as you guys can probably tell, they're hanging on to their properties longer too. And that's another issue, because that means there's fewer properties being released into the market. And then a final demographic factor that's causing problems is the decline in household size. We have more and more older adults living individually on their own. And so what does that mean? That means we need more units of housing for a given amount of population than we've ever needed before. There's other problems, of course. There's cash investors, including cash buyers, including investors who are out there scooping up properties, which is another issue. So first-time home buyers are encountering a lot of competition when they try and make bids, and that's what produced all those overbids and other sorts of phenomenon we were reading about last year mostly. So what's happened recently? Well, nothing good. The interest rates are going up. You know, the 30-year mortgage rate is roughly doubled in the last year. That's one of the most rapid increases in interest rates that we've seen in decades. And that's dampened affordability even more as home buyers are priced out of the market at those higher rates. Data I've seen suggests that about a third of purchase contracts are getting canceled because home buyers can't qualify at those new and higher rates. So we're seeing some decline in house prices in many, perhaps most markets now in response to those higher interest rates and the difficulties in terms of an imbalance between supply and demand. Turning to Fannie Mae's official forecast, we believe that we're going to be in a recession in Q1 of 2023. We're predicting negative economic growth during this quarter, Q4 of 2022. We expect the Open Market Committee of the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates again during December. The big question is it 50 or is it 75? And Chairman Powell's been indicating that it's probably 50 basis points. And another related issue that comes around when interest rates go up is the so-called lock-in effect, where homeowners have a significant financial incentive not to move because they'll forfeit their low interest rate mortgage and they'll have to take out a new mortgage at almost double the price. We estimate that as of October, about 80% of borrowers had a mortgage that was at least 200 basis points, that's 2%, below current market rates. So that keeps supply off the market as well. Turning now to the rental market, I think it's important to mention at the outset that about half of renter-occupied housing units are actually single-family dwelling units, including condominiums. And the vast majority of those are owned by small landlords, not institutional investors, despite the somewhat overblown media coverage of investor ownership. At near zero interest rates, investing in single family rental property and earning 3, 4, 5, maybe 6% in terms of a current yield, that's looked pretty good in recent years when interest rates were so low. Now, supply is less of a problem in the multifamily sector, in the sense that there's been a lot of construction in recent years. There's a lot of new construction, a lot of new units going up just about everywhere. Of course, the substantial majority of those are Class A luxury properties. So absent specific set-asides for affordable units, the growth in supply will have to come about through downward filtering. That is, as units get older and cheaper, they become more affordable. We call that natural affordability. But really a more fundamental income on the rental side, more fundamental problem on the rental side is simply income. As Jenny Schutz of the Brookings Institute put it recently, the fundamental problem is that without subsidies, the bottom fifth of the income distribution cannot afford rentals in any market, anywhere. So those are some of the problems we're facing, and I'll turn it back to our moderator to start raising questions about suitable solutions. Back to you.
Thanks, Michael, and Happy New Year, everyone. We're going to have a great year ahead of us, Michael. You know, the one thing that I would like to ask the panel to kind of think about it is, I think there's always a question whether government subsidies and regulations that are designed to combat the affordable housing crisis versus the ones that are more market driven. And you see it all over the country. Different markets have an easier affordability rate. I'd like the panel to get their view. Do you think the federal and state governments are they to blame for a lot of these problems? Starting with you, Jed.
Oh, thanks. I just want to say that hot mic is one of my worst fears. So. Wow. So I may have missed something. Is our title today is solving the affordable housing crisis?
You're not going to solve it today.
Probably not.
All right, let's go over to Catherine. You actually,
probably not. We have okay. So I know New York better than the rest of the country, but I think that a lot of what we encounter here is fairly emblematic of what happens in larger metropolitan areas across the country, right? So the problem, as we heard, is fundamentally one of supply. There isn't enough housing. And I love hearing that it's not as big an issue on the multifamily side because we're building plenty of housing. We're not building plenty of housing here in New York. So the Furman Center at NYU recently came out with a study. They said we've built about 200,000 units of housing, both rental and condo in New York City in the last decade. We know from the census, the 2020 census, we've added about 800,000 people to New York, which I always like to joke is approximately one Detroit. So that's a lot of people. We also heard that household sizes are shrinking. We know that the average household size is not 4. So if you add 800,000 people and 200,000 units, you have a problem. So I guess the short answer to your question is the government helping or hurting? Well, the single biggest challenge in building anything is finding land. That's just a fact. And land is only scarce because of government regulation. So there's a lot of land. New York City is 500 square miles. There are plenty of places that have very small buildings that could be replaced with very large buildings, but zoning is a challenge. And we're seeing a lot of cities across the country, states across the country wake up to this. And California just passed some landmark legislation to combat single family zoning, to allow for more density. But that's fundamentally that's the place to start, really, is land is scarce because of the rules, not because we don't have a lot of land. This is a big country. And if you look at cities in the Sun Belt where affordability is less of a challenge, in general, they make it a little bit easier to build on land. Also, in general, they have land in every direction. If you think about a Houston or an Atlanta or a Charlotte, it just goes on in every direction. We have rivers and oceans here, so it's a little bit more challenging. But I think that for starters, the availability of land is a false constraint that's imposed largely by state and local government.
Hey, Chris, you're in the opposite sector of like regulated buildings in New York and being in, which I think is really interesting, in the manufactured housing, which seems organically has solved affordable housing organically without government regulation, but yet you guys still have a lot of NIMBYism you do. Can you respond to Jed and give me your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say to answer the first part of the question, I mean, it's, and I say this as definitely a free market advocate, but there's no way that this issue can be solved without government assistance, whatever form that comes in. It's just not, because they left to our own devices, developers are going to build what's going to generate the most profit. And if you're going to build a building in New York or anywhere in the US, unless you're getting help, you're going to build something that's going to be catered to a higher price point. I mean, it's just, the math is pretty simple. So you have to, whether it's abatements or subsidy, whatever you want to call it, it just has to, I think they have to be a partner in this. But in terms of like manufactured housing, yeah, I mean, that's one of our biggest challenges is NIMBYism. I think the cost structure is very attractive for affordable housing. We can deliver a 3 to 4 bedroom brand new home, a home that if I could parachute you in that home, you would not realize you're in, a manufactured home or mobile home. They're really nice finishes, and we can deliver that for $60,000 fully installed, which is almost impossible to beat. I mean, in any market. Stigma is one of the hardest things because most people don't come into this world as an aspirational goal to live in a manufactured housing community. And then NIMBYism zoning, so there's certain states that are just more friendly to zoning rights or the way their laws are set up. You don't have to go to approval as long as you can satisfy certain conditions, you can develop there. There's others that are much more stringent, and there's no way you'll get a manufactured home community in their municipality. So I would say that's probably zoning is probably the biggest obstacle. But if you could develop in, I don't want to say anywhere, but in a lot of these markets, it wouldn't solve the issue, but it would help.
Right.
Because it's just a cheaper price point, and operators can make money at that level. Like if we own a community, we'll buy a home, bring it in, and we can rent that home, and it's a 4-bedroom, and we can rent that home for $1,200 a month. But when you look at like AMI, the math makes sense at that price point. I mean, it really makes sense. It's just trying to find the land and the zoning to allow that to work.
Kathy, you would like to weigh in on that?
Well, I agree with what my fellow panelists have said, and I kind of think that regardless of whether or not the government has been part of the problem, they are absolutely part of the solution, and we can't do any of this without their support and without their cooperation. And, I think zoning is really where a lot of this does begin. I mean, people are very, I guess, pro their single family zoning, single family neighborhoods, and there's a lot of concern about the end of that. I don't necessarily think that that's the case. We need to build more housing, all kinds of housing. There isn't going to be an end of neighborhoods just because you can have a unit over your garage or in your backyard, but that creates a unit that's more affordable than something brand new, and that creates, more living opportunities for people within an area. I also think zoning, it's very contentious on whether it should be decided at the neighborhood level, at the borough or citywide level, or at the state level. I don't know which one of those is right. I think there's probably pluses and minuses to decisions happening at each one of those levels. But I think here in New York City, the city council, they're responsible for making a lot of decisions, and they have a practice of member deference where they let the local member decide. And so that's really one person deciding the fate of a project because it's in their area. My personal view is that that's probably not the right way to look at things, that we have a whole council of 51 people and we should have, more people weighing in. So I would like to see kind of more collaboration from the council, from the government, an end to that practice, and, more of a viewpoint of what is good for New York City, as opposed to one neighborhood deciding.
If I could just add to that, and I
Yeah.
want to follow up on this discussion, is I sat through a very interesting at Fordham, a sustainability conference, more city related based on the local laws that are coming out and are out. And it seems to me that the one thing I came away with, no matter how you slice it, it's going to be much more expensive. And they really haven't solved anything because they're still going to have to burn oil and gas to fire up these electrified buildings. When you add those costs and you look at these neighborhoods, we lend all over the country. And one of the things we do, we Google drive a place, and we're doing shopping centers or we're doing apartments. And it's starting to become very clear. You can tell right away a neighborhood that's in decline versus a neighborhood that's probably gentrifying, or probably people living there, a little bit of the self-actuators that live there and not the general masses that need a place to live. How do we balance the two? Or ideas are great, very virtuous, but look at the neighborhoods in the cities that could be restored if they didn't have this kind of burden. Does anybody want to take that? And I think this theme plays out all over the country in urban areas.
Well, I guess, you have to offer incentives for people to come and invest in neighborhoods, right? So I think maybe it starts with that. If you're seeing some that look better than others, there's opportunity there. So you want to bring people in that will develop and improve things, but you also need to keep in mind, the people that live there and whether or not they may be displaced or somehow negatively impacted by any new development. I think it's a really difficult balance. Probably one of the crucial questions.
I mean, if the question is how do you get new investment in historically disadvantaged neighborhoods? The answer ultimately is we developers are simple creatures. We will build anything that Catherine will finance, literally anything.
Great answer.
And that's because that's what we do. We find land, we figure out what we can build on it. We have a vision. We make it happen.
Gotta make.
We need to make money on it. So the first step is will a lender finance this, which means it has to have enough of a return to pay them back. And then the question is there enough on top of that to make a return on equity? And that's where government comes in, right? So a lot of our affordable housing work that we do in historically underserved neighborhoods, underdeveloped neighborhoods has no equity, right? So we're largely selling, and many of these projects are funded by a combination of tax exempt bonds and low income housing tax credits, which removes the requirement of a return, basically by selling tax credits to institutional investors. We can make money building in places where rent is not yet high enough. And yet there's still plenty of community opposition in many cases to these projects because the perception often is that density is bad because it signals gentrification, and that it displaces. Although there's plenty of great data that shows that even market rate development in communities doesn't increase rents. That at the end of the day, our problem is one of supply, and creating more units is always in the interest of the community. So I think the answer is in places where rents are not high enough to justify making money in the private markets, we need government to step in and provide some combination of tax credits, real estate tax exemptions, direct cash subsidies that make it possible to convince lenders that it's worth funding.
Right. Michael, you'd like to add to that discussion?
Well, I think certainly manufactured housing is an interesting area. Fannie Mae does finance manufactured housing communities. And the interesting thing I think there is that you're kind of removing the cost of the land because you know, the tenant is paying the ground rent underneath the unit, whether they own the unit or whether they're leasing the unit too. So that's an interesting opportunity to, you know, eliminate one of the costs. Now, is that really scalable throughout the country? As was correctly said, there's a lot of stigma still associated with manufactured housing communities, and their success seems to be greater in rural areas rather than urban areas. But I do think that's an important element in the mix. Low-income housing tax credit business, we're in that business too. We've been authorized by our regulator to make equity investments. So that's another important element. So I think we need a wide array of tools to try and address these problems.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I think Michael's right. Manufactured housing really helps in, you know, secondary or rural areas, but in areas where land is just so expensive, like this area, you can't possibly justify a manufactured housing community. So it's a great partial solution in those markets. Fannie has been very active. They do finance. We've been pushing them. So maybe you can plug for us, Michael, to finance the homes as well. So like they'll finance they'll be our lender to buy a community. What would really help people is to finance the homes themselves, which is just trickier because it's chattel, it's not real estate, and it just opens up a whole bunch of different things. But and they're trying. There's pilot programs there, but that's an innovative way for the government to help, and it's a good business. It's not even that shouldn't even be a subsidized business. It's just a different business than what they're in. The other thing I would say, and this applies to I think either urban or not, is to try to get over the NIMBY hump of, you know, at some point, people, if housing is so expensive, and New York City is fastly approaching, if it's not already there, if housing is so expensive, the workers that we all, like every worker, you know, at some point, I mean, I brought a cup of coffee on my way over here today, and that guy can't be making that much money. I can't imagine where he lives. So he has to commute 2 hours to sell me a cup of coffee in New York City. And at some point, he is just going to get priced out of the market. You know, it's just where it doesn't make sense. Maybe it's a 3-hour commute. I don't know where that line is, but at some point, it's just not only is it the right thing to do, but like it just, you can't have, and I think Lou, you alluded to this when you talked about that human need. At some point, we have to solve it because it's just society can't exist if you just have areas where only a small percentage can live and afford, and then everybody else lives somewhere else far away, because you need people of all types to make a society work. So, I mean, it sounds, you know, like futuristic, but it really, and we're kind of approaching that in New York City, places like London, New York, where it's just so exorbitantly expensive. You can't possibly live in Manhattan on minimum wage in any sort of like acceptable conditioned unit. I mean, it's just,
Or at all.
or at all. Yeah, exactly. Even if it isn't.
And
acceptable.
Chris,
Even
I
if it
worked
isn't
with
together.
Chris for a long time, and Chris is not a great tipper either, by the way. So that cup of coffee was rough.
Well, I've had this debate. I've had this debate with investment banker friends who say things like, why do we need government subsidized affordable housing? Why is that? Why do we need housing to be affordable? Living in Manhattan is a luxury good. Why do we need to subsidize that? And my answer is, in the first instance, maybe we don't, but we're not even talking about Manhattan. We're talking about the South Bronx. We're talking about East New York. It's not affordable anywhere. So and exactly what you said, Chris, is right. We can't have a functioning city or a functioning society where the vast army of service workers we need to keep the city running the way it runs can't live not only in the city, but near the city. That it won't function. It won't survive. We can't, and none of us want to live in a city where we're paying for services a price that supports a luxury apartment for that guy who sells the coffee, right? We want that job to be able to afford a decent, high quality, livable apartment in a reasonable, livable commute. And there are two ways to do that. We talked about the income problem, right? So you can pay $14 for the cup of coffee, which nobody wants to do, or we can think about how do we make it livable at the price that you will still pay for a cup of coffee. It's a real challenge. And we across all of the programs that we use to create affordable housing, our favorite is Section 8, because it pays what HUD deems a market price for an apartment rather than saying what can the tenant afford. That's what you get, and we'll make up the difference in capital subsidy up front. At least Section 8 pays the tenant pays what they can afford. The federal government pays the balance up to a predetermined rent. But at least that addresses, it's sustainable for the long term because at least we can cover operating costs, right? This is not just a problem of the capital cost to create housing. There's an ongoing problem of the operating costs in high cost places like New York, San Francisco, Boston, Washington, Los Angeles, exceeding the maximum rents that are set in a lot of the affordable housing programs that we build in.
Interesting you brought up Section 8. And I've been involved a little bit in it. And it's kind of, when you have your tenant rosters, mostly Section 8, you get paid. And if you can instill the kind of rules that you can enforce at these properties, they stay together. Has that been your experience? The Section 8 is doing well?
Well, I mean,
from a hierarchy of human need, is somebody have a home there that they're feeling comfortable that they don't mind getting up and going to work that day?
So we've built some beautiful Section 8 housing, and the government pays, right? So the tenant portion, there are issues, and we could, they're getting back to what can government do. Government can do a little bit more than it does in certain metropolitan areas to require that tenants pay rent. So we do have collection issues on the tenant portion for sure, but the bulk of a Section 8 property is ultimately coming in directly from HUD, and that's bankable, right? That's a 15 or 20-year contract, and that's federally guaranteed, and it makes it possible to finance a significant amount of capital out because you have this federal income stream, and it reduces the amount of public subsidy necessary. And politicians love it because a 20-year contract with HUD that's mostly out year money, that's politicians' favorite kind of money.
Does anybody find the issue of crime? There's been a change in policing. There's been a change in enforcement. There's a lot of political debate about it. But I also wonder that what affects, again, housing that you'd want to live in as a human being. Do you find that when you look at areas, I know nobody's supposed to redline. I mean, how do we address that? How do you may have some old tenement buildings that could be really fine and fixed up economically. What is the government, what are the cities, and not just in New York, nationally, what are we doing to make some of these neighborhoods safer for somebody that wants to live there and make a go out of it? And are we just ignoring it right now?
I don't know. Crime is sort of outside my purview.
And it's also outside this building, so be careful.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
In New York these days. Part of living in the city, but I think we've all read the news. It seems to be going up nationwide. So I think it's an issue a lot of places are facing. And obviously there's been a lot of debate about policing and what that should entail for these last several years. But I don't think I'm qualified to comment.
Michael,
one thing that is true is the experience of crime varies tremendously. I can't speak to what's going on in other places. I know that New York remains the safest big city in America, and I know that because I actually did check because I have a lot of friends whining about how awful the city has gotten in terms of crime. Crime has rolled back all the way to levels not seen since the Bloomberg administration, which for those of us who lived through the Bloomberg administration, I don't think back on that as being a particularly dangerous time. So I think there's a lot of media attention on high level crime statistics, but ultimately it doesn't really impact the way we think about where to build or what to build, because our general belief is that if you improve housing stock, you're in our little way, we are contributing to improving neighborhoods and chipping away at the crime problem, which unfortunately in New York, we talk about high level citywide statistics, but it really is a neighborhood by neighborhood problem.
Right.
And where we can build 100% affordable housing unfortunately coincides with neighborhoods that have higher crime.
Right.
But by improving housing stock, we're hopefully doing our part.
I think people want to live, and I know, and we're generally in more urban areas, but crime is everywhere. And our focus is to make it a safe, secure environment. And now it's a little bit easier in a manufactured housing community because it's dispersed. These are individual units, so it's not mid-rise or high-rise, which, but we have like a zero tolerance, and our residents really like that. They help us enforce that, and it does become, you get momentum there because people want to live there. Then if it's like a safe, secure environment, then they will be drawn to that, right? And so it's not only, it's good for us, but it's, it's the interests are aligned there.
Right.
But it is easier certainly in that sort of environment than an urban environment.
Well, I would say I actually disagree with that a little bit. I think that we have very similar experience in the urban environment. We're just stacking it vertically. Residents in apartment buildings. These are in New York City. If you live in affordable housing, you literally won the lottery, right? There's a lottery. We have a lottery ongoing right now. We have a property in West Chelsea that has 235 affordable units for on average targeting low income families. We got, I think, 83,000 lottery entries for 235 units. So if you have affordable housing, you've won the lottery. And if you're living in a brand new, modern, well-appointed community apartment community in a neighborhood that is otherwise disadvantaged, there is a certain communal feeling and a pride of ownership and an investment in maintaining a safe zero tolerance community.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I was thinking more not brand new in Chelsea,
right?
But, maybe.
No, but even brand new, but even brand new in Mott Haven there is that sense of community. People understand. Everybody who lives there has come from a housing situation that was in some way worse, more expensive, older, less clean, less safe, less habitable, less secure. Right. And there's an interest in cooperating to maintain that.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that's a fair point. Most people are incentivized because, there are a few exceptions, but they want to live in a safe, secure environment, right? That they can afford. And that's...
Michael, is there any Fannie Mae guidelines? I mean, is there any linkage when you look at development deals and a lot of times when you build something, you get certain concessions by bringing certain infrastructure into, let's say, an area that didn't have it. Schools, they get properties for retail development. Is there any thought about an added cost to those buildings to deal with, at least if not perceived crime in some of these areas?
Yeah, I'm no expert on crime, but I do think there's a disconnect between perceptions of crime and actual crime. And that's probably something that's going on given the way the media sensationalizes some of the most horrific things that we hear about. To your point about Fannie Mae's programs, we have a number of programs that incent our multifamily developers or multifamily landlords to add amenities to their properties. The most well-known one is our Green Rewards program, where we provide financial incentives for energy savings features in multifamily buildings. And, we're the largest issuer of green bonds in the world with all of those programs. That program's been going on for almost a decade now. But we're also looking at other sorts of financial incentives for, let's say, a childcare center in the building, or after school program for kids in the building. Those are the types of things that we may be able to do to encourage those sorts of supplementary services to make the multifamily unit owner or multifamily unit renter a little bit more comfortable in their home.
Good. Just quickly, a rapid question to the group. How does it look over the next 10 years? I mean, will we solve, do we agree? We disagree whether we have a crime issue, and that's fine. Do we disagree that we do have an affordable housing crisis? Like Chris's coffee guy that.
No, there's a crisis.
There's a crisis, okay.
No doubt of that.
You
And
can
it-
deny that. I mean, the statistics
Right,
so
right.
clearly point to it.
And,
I think we heard that we're short 3 or 4 million housing units
right,
across the country. That sounds light to me.
it sounds like.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we're short 1 million in New York, so I don't know about the rest of the country, but
And in fairness to people who operate in New York, it's a really pretty different place, right? You go to tertiary cities or, the Richmonds or the Trentons and these other cities, like, it seems like affordable housing that's good, that gives people the feeling of achieving and going on to do better. I think it is a good recipe, but we're gonna open up the discussion to the audience. Does anybody have a question? And Andy, you've done such a great job. She's going to,
Appreciate that. And thank all of you for your time. Really appreciate you guys being here. My name's Colin. I'm at Fordham Real Estate Institute student. My question involves thinking about solutions, supply-driven solutions. Catherine, I think, hinted at, referenced ADUs. I know there are other, things that aren't necessarily could be legalized in New York, like SROs. Or I think New Jersey is trying out builder's remedy, which has been in law in California for a couple of years now. I'm curious if you guys think, one, are those types of things politically sellable as well as financially bankable? Are those real solutions? Thanks.
good question.
Well, I think that the ADUs are an easy solution, right? A lot of them already exist. So that supply that's there. It's just not legal in New York right now. I think that there is a proposal in front of the legislature for their next session to approve and legalize those. I hope that that's something that can get done. I think that that is the kind of thing that not only provides more housing, but it can help current homeowners. It can provide them with a little bit more income, maybe offset some other rising costs that they're facing due to inflation. So I think legalizing the ADUs, which would include the basement apartments in New York, that is a easy solution, low-hanging fruit, I think, for the supply issues.
and across the country, it's an opportunity to quickly create some additional supply in neighborhoods that may be resisting to changing the building typology. But if half the people in your neighborhood add an ADU over their garage, right, you have all of a sudden you've got 25% more housing than you had before. Or I guess I did my math wrong. It's a third more housing than you had before, without which is a big change in density, but without a big change in real estate typology, which I think is politically sellable.
Does everybody know what an ADU is? If you don't, raise your hand.
Oh, accessory dwelling unit is what it stands for.
Oh, stupid.
Let me just add that this is really part of a broader idea, which is sometimes termed light touch regulation or light touch zoning, where you're going to allow a lot more different types of units. And that could be the ADU that's built over the garage. It could be a duplex on what was previously zoned for a single family house. It could be a triplex on what was previously zoned for a 2-unit. It could be dividing a single family unit into multiple units. I saw one analysis of Los Angeles that suggested that actually there's probably enough bedrooms in Los Angeles, but there aren't enough housing units. So what does that mean? Well, that means that, you've got older baby boomers living alone in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. And if that unit could be, divided into a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom, then you would be creating additional units too. So it's, in some sense, it's a misallocation of real estate resources that's not keeping up with demand, and light touch zoning or light touch regulation may be a way to get more units created.
Okay, we have a few write-in questions from our virtual audience. Where is workforce housing being developed in the city? Is this an area that needs more attention?
Well, I guess the first question was what does workforce housing mean in New York? There are a lot of different forces, and I would say that as a rule, however you define workforce and what workforce housing means, we're not building enough of it. But if we're thinking of workforce in terms of people who are in that middle band of the income distribution, very little of that is being built right now, in part because the tax abatement that financed most of it, 421A, expired in June. In order workforce housing, if we're thinking of not low-income housing, not luxury housing, the vast majority of that was being produced in New York was in the sort of middle band of the outer boroughs, Brooklyn, Queens, and that just isn't going to happen without 421A.
Which we could have a whole other panel on that, but I mean,
I'm
that's
surprised
a
that
good
hasn't come up.
example. That's a great example of, and it was very politicized, but that's where the government has to come in and help with a solution to then incentivize developers to build the product that is most needed. That's really what it comes down to, right? Because what you said is absolutely true. Like developers, they'll build whatever. I mean, I think we are simple creatures, right? And it's not that complicated, but developers won't build something that doesn't make economic sense. That they won't do. So 421A, I mean, it had its flaws, no doubt, but the fact that it just was allowed to expire with no replacement is just ridiculous. And that's politicized, but until they fix that, and where they're going to start to see it is when they really start to see the issue with affordable housing in the city.
Well, I'm gonna say some things about politicians. They're not going to notice for 3 years, right? The electeds are going to look around for the next year or two and say, what are you talking about? Tons of stuff is getting built.
Yeah.
And it's all getting built because it was grandfathered in with a 421A. In 2 or 3 years, when nothing is happening, they'll realize that they goofed. What really gets me, and we could do an entire panel on this, but what gets me really angry about the expiration of 421A is that it's bad progressive policy. Like it was a progressive priority to eliminate it because it's a handout to guys like me. But first of all, it isn't, because it's an exemption from future taxes. So the progressive argument that, well, we could better use that $2 billion a year in other affordable housing programs misses the fact that without it, we really can't build. And it's not because we just like not paying taxes. It's because the project isn't financeable without the tax abatement. It doesn't produce an adequate yield to not only pay back our lenders, but provide return on equity. So that's that. And we raise the equity, right? It's not like we set what the return on equity is. There are capital markets, or at least there were capital markets 6 months ago.
Yeah, I think, I would just add to Jed's point. I mean, from what we're seeing right now, the only projects are coming in are ones that got in before 421A expired. And nothing is coming in that doesn't have that. And so unfortunately, the result of this policy of 421A being too generous is that without it, you're going to have nothing built. So there has to be some solution.
Yeah, reasonable people can argue about whether 35 years is the right number or
whether the affordability mix needs to be higher, but you need to,
have
it
some.
has to pencil out, and you have to have some incentive for there to be non-subsidized affordable housing built.
The other thing, because we're in both of those spaces, just one other thought on that is that it produces a really bad outcome, because we're still building lots of publicly subsidized affordable housing, but the way those programs are structured, we can't pay more than $100 a square foot for land. Is that fair? $75, $80.
That's a whole other issue.
Right?
While you try to make a deal on your next project, why don't you just somebody else from the audience?
Hi. So I work for a bank in Connect One, and I see a lot of office buildings like the B, maybe even the C type, like in the boroughs part of New York, where they're still running at pretty high vacancies. And when we offer, we tell the developer, could you convert it to residential? This adding in construction makes no sense, or even so that you agree with that doesn't.
Yeah, there are we've looked at a few. There are a lot of reasons why it doesn't make sense. The big one is that the building typology itself often doesn't really lend itself to code compliant housing, particularly with B and C office buildings. You very often don't have windows on a lot of sides, number one, and number two, where you do, office buildings tend to get built with really big floor plates because that's what tenants like, and that creates too much depth. It's hard to make an apartment that's deeper than 25, 27 feet because you run out of uses for rooms without windows, particularly if you want to create affordable housing, because those units don't lend themselves to screening rooms and wine cellars. And so it can be physically challenging, but also the costs aren't there. And I haven't seen any owner, or I hate to say this, lender on an office building want to take a deep enough discount to make the conversion make sense. Also, there's no tax abatement for that.
Hi there, my name is Orion Jones. I'm from The Real Deal. I would like to hear from the developers on stage what levels of affordability they're prepared to discuss, or what is kind of on the table, because when it comes to renewing 421A, seems like that's definitely on the table.
That's actually, it's a great question. And it has an easy answer. It's just math. So any level of affordability is on the table, because ultimately it's just about the math. Our chairman, Jeff Levine, he likes to say that he's Tinkerbell. He exists if the banks believe he exists. And if you know him, thinking of him as Tinkerbell is amazing.
So for example, the way in which 421A was previously structured, are you comfortable saying 50% is okay on every project?
Sorry, 50% affordability?
Correct.
I think, again, it's just math. It's
right,
hard.
but what I'm asking is, like, what is your math?
Oh, that I couldn't speculate off the cuff, but I think it's hard to imagine that in most cases a project could still pencil, particularly in a higher interest rate environment where you need to target a higher yield on cost to pay your lenders back at the end of the project. It's hard to imagine that at 50% affordability, holding everything else constant, the numbers will work. Of course, everything else is not constant. Perhaps we'll see construction costs come down, although if inflation's running 6-8%, that's hard to imagine. Labor costs, nobody wants to see come down, and land is the big unknown, right? So if can land adjust enough to get to 50% affordability? maybe, but I doubt it because somewhere between where land is and that number, some people will just build condos.
Well, and
Thank
you
you.
could solve for the abatement too. That would be just a much more significant subsidy, you know, to make that work. So if it was important enough to a city, they could make that math work, but it is just math. I mean, it's.
Hey, I would like to propose something that I've been thinking about. When I started in the business, 1981, I worked for Chase Manhattan Bank in construction lending. And what do you think the prime rate was in 1981? Anybody want to guess?
15.
Huh?
15.
Not bad.
16.
It went as high as 20%. Okay, and I was out of school. I didn't really realize what that meant. I mean, at the time, organized crime was lending at 15% and the banks were lending at 20%. So, but the reason I make this point is over my 35 to 40-year career, rates have only come down. The indexes came down and drove a lot of created valuation wealth. And I think the thing that may save the day when I hear about adaptive reuses, why you really can't do any right now, is when those buildings start getting devalued, like in, let's say, an office building, it may make some sense. When you can start to pick that up for pennies on the dollars, those deals will start making sense. And maybe more of a market force of buildings just being available might start to solve that things, because guys like Douglas in development and Wells will realize this is a good business to get into. Does anybody agree with that?
Yes, you know, there's a, that's math too,
Yeah.
right? So there is a price at which it makes sense. And if we see a massive sustained vacancy in Class B and Class C office buildings, eventually they probably will get cheap enough that something makes sense. But we're also going to need some creativity, some regulatory creativity to expand what's allowed.
I mean, we developed something in Kansas City. It was a blighted retail center. We bought it, scraped it, and got it rezoned for housing, a component of which was, you know, affordable. They also approved as part of that zoning, grocery store. And so what the incentive for us to do it was we got 2%, and this math might be a little bit off, but like some of the sales revenue, we would get it 2% for 20 years. And that was enough of an enticement to make the math work. So that city was so happy because they went from a blighted, busted mall to now 400, 500 units with a really nice grocery store and some inline tenants, and the neighborhood's much better off. So it's not that hard to do. I mean, it is, not to keep saying it, it is just the math. And then just, you know, innovation on, you know, that municipality's part. I mean, we're just one of many developers that would do that, but it's like, you just have to convince them that, all right, here's the path, this is how it's going to work. It's not that complicated. And they were just sick of looking at that retail center that was empty.
But across the board, I think, to your point, that one thing that we need nationwide is to better convey to public officials, both elected and staff, that it actually is, it's just math, that we are just, there's a cost of capital, and what we do has to exceed that, or else we can't raise it, right? And that if it really is true, that the debt and the equity will find things to invest in. Those things might be in Austin or in Nashville or in Kansas City, where it's competitive. So wherever you are, whichever municipality you're working in, I think it would do public officials well to understand that we don't invent the math. The math is imposed on us by the capital markets.
Yeah, hi. My name is Yal Audrey. I work with Berkshire Hathaway. This is more of a comment. First, I want to thank you guys for all this great information. I got a lot out of it, you know, what's going on with the affordable housing, but I just wanted to make a point on the crime statistics that I want everybody to understand. I've been working very closely the last 6 months with the 1st Precinct Police Department down by Canal Street. And what's interesting about police statistics, crime statistics, is that the police department, depending on the mayor, will actively pursue to make people to have complaints be to make arrests. Like somebody comes, the best way I can explain it is like, it's like a police officer, like under like the Bloomberg administration, was looking to make an arrest if there was a complaint. Now they're kind of under the Blasio administration. They're kind of like, before him, they're like kind of talking people not to make a complaint. I don't think you should make a complaint. It's a waste of time. We're not going to convict. So the statistics, the crime statistics might be a little bit higher than the numbers are showing because the police are not actively pursuing to have witnesses make complaints, because I work with a lot of police officers. And what's interesting was I was doing a lot of work in Canal Street because that's like there was like a 1 block radius, like the autonomous zone. And the real estate was really getting affected with the realtors, not the realtors, excuse me, retail, because retailers was very hard to get storefronts rented. And the residents living there were under tremendous duress by all the aggressive peddling and now everybody's smoking weed and alcohol in that one spot. So I just want to make a comment about that. So when it comes to crime statistics, just be a little bit careful. You know what I mean? Don't, because they might be a little bit off. Thank you.
Okay, we have several online questions. This one is from Ryan O'Connor, our Executive Advisory Council Chair in waiting. And he's asking, how would a looming recessionary environment impact financing on government subsidized housing in the next 2 to 3 years? He stumped you.
Can you repeat it?
Sure. How would a looming recessionary environment impact financing on government subsidized housing in the next 2 to 3 years?
This is where I just like
10
to
points.
remind Ryan that he's in charge of my collections.
Well, look, I think, we've mentioned several times the rising interest rate environment. Spreads are also widening. And I think that that's increasing financing costs for projects that rely on government subsidies. And it's putting a lot of pressure on the budgets and on all the sources. We've seen LIHTC equity pricing come down. So it's a lot harder to get the numbers to work. I think some of our local governments may have less resources to provide as we come into a recession next year. So I think overall there could be less housing production, unfortunately. But I think, from my side and where I'm sitting, we want to continue to finance affordable housing. We will be there at the table to provide our debt and equity. But unfortunately, we do have to move with the market. So, it will cost more, and it's a challenge that we're all going to have to deal with.
Right. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, Bradley with Berkshire Hathaway. I had a question about the green bonds. I think Mike was alluding to. We saw in the midterms that was on the back of the ballot sheet, but I don't think a lot of us understood what that meant. And I think I'm curious what you think about that as like financing new developments, and how much of that is like a marketing ploy and how much of that is actually effective, and what specifically does that mean for real estate brokers in New York City or real estate developers?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the particular ballot measure you're referring to. So I really can't comment on that. The green bonds that Fannie Mae issues, or the majority of them, are multifamily backed with the use of the proceeds going for energy efficiency. So if you can make the utility cost lower, that's a benefit to both the landlord and to the tenant. And we're creating incentives to property owners to do that through the financing mechanisms that we have. I think your reference to marketing ploy reflects the term greenwashing, where you find some companies making a big deal out of all their green initiatives, many of which don't really amount to much. But the program I was talking about was use of proceeds arrangements where the rate can be discounted a little bit if the borrower is going to make those kinds of green investments that are empirically verifiable. I mean, there's no question about greenwashing in that case.
I would say that our view in general is that renters don't care. They care about energy efficiency to the extent that they're paying an electric bill, but whether the building is labeled LEED Gold or any of these, we're doing some passive house development now because government cares. But I would say that for the most part, the residents don't. However, over the last 2 months, 3 months, as capital has dried up to a trickle, all of a sudden we're getting a lot more inquiry from investors who do care, right? A lot of investors saying, we have ESG targets that we have to meet. What are you doing for sustainability? Because we're not allocating much in the way of money. We're allocating it to projects that meet our ESG targets. And I say, but we're all about S, and that doesn't really matter.
We've had the same experience.
We need some E.
It's been interesting
want the E.
recently that's been, and they can move the needle because that's the money. So when they tell you that like they want that commitment, we sit up and listen because they're the ones giving us the money. So we have seen recently a push there, which is good. I mean, because it forces that focus in. But
Chris,
Tinkerbell.
try to understand it's the top part of the pyramid, the self-actuators that are really into that. And they represent about 3% of the housing market.
But it has an effect. I mean, it has.
But if, yeah,
It
and
has
if
an effect
it's,
because the government is.
if
making it have an
equity providers want to see it, then that's a big deal.
Well-
It's something we have to do, right? Buildings are, I think, behind cows as the world's largest emitters of carbon. So we have to do our part, and we do, right? There are energy codes, and as energy prices rise, we are always looking for ways to make our buildings more efficient naturally. But particularly pushing on a decarbonization or a sustainability agenda, it really is starting to come from the capital markets, which is where everything else we do comes from. So it's a real part of what we're working on.
Chris, you spent a lot of time in China and overseas. And a lot of those requirements are definitely driven by government, okay? And from what you're saying, if I understand you, Jed, is that, hey, listen, it doesn't matter if I need to get my equity from people that are being influenced to make sure that they're investing with that goal in mind, then you as a developer have every right to say, listen, we're going to try to satisfy that if we can make the numbers work.
Well, I would say it a little bit.
I just don't know what it does for the affordable people looking for homes.
I would say it a little bit differently. I would say that if the institutional capital partners that we're raising money from, right, are hearing from their investors that they want to be investing in green projects, like that's where real change comes from. It comes like if the capital wants to see greater levels of sustainability, more than what we're doing to comply with ever tightening codes,
Right.
because the biggest driver of sustainability is what the government requires of us, for no doubt.
Right, I mean, I think that's obvious and the administration has just made it a guideline for 401ks to invest in those areas and some will do it and some will feel they have to comply. But I guess my point is, I look at that, but then I look at Chris's business, which is really organic. And there's people living in these houses who have housing right now. And I know it's not New York and it may not be more urban based, but I think there will be a day of reckoning where we might not be able to afford the things we think that are very important, and everybody's for a clean planet and everything else. But if there's riots in the street because people have no place to live, I think we may regret this move.
It
Just my
isn't-
opinion.
It isn't necessarily that clear a trade-off. I mean, I think, Chris, what's the differential in cost to improve the energy envelope of manufactured housing?
Well, yeah, I have no idea is the answer.
Because you
but
never thought about it. You're too busy
But
renting.
here's what I would say, though, we have investors that say, look, we might lower our preferred return
All right.
for you guys to then offer more affordable housing than you currently are, like subsidized housing, like Section 8 or whatever. And so we start breaking out our calculators and say, okay, well, how does that work? And so like, I think we've never had that before
Right.
where capital is in saying like, because that's a big thing for us, this is the investor speaking. So figure out, we're willing to lower our, our pref. So like, and that's how we get paid. So we'll just, it goes back to the math. So then we just say, all right, we'll look at that. And then now we just got $100 million. We have to deploy that into something that has a higher percentage of affordable housing than we might have otherwise looked
Right.
at before that conversation. So I think that's where it'll be impactful.
Another question back there?
Yes, so on the topic of emissions, are there technologies that, quote unquote, will pay for themselves after a number of years such that they're being penciled into new development projects, or is it all retrofitting at this point? And what, if it's retrofitting, what's good? What's good?
What are you seeing?
I don't know the details on that. I mean, I do know that the city has their, new emission standards coming in. So I think they start phasing in 2024, and they're going to require buildings to start complying over the following 5 or 6 years. And any building over 25,000 square feet in the city is going to have to cut its emissions, upgrade its systems to meet those standards, or start paying fines.
Right.
So there's going to be, this is coming very soon, and people are going to be looking for, exactly what you're asking about, what it's efficient, what pays for itself. Can I get financing for this? And I think it's just a whole thing that, is just see what happens.
Yeah, I don't think we know yet.
Yeah.
I don't think we know yet.
Hey, if I could just, Neil Matson, who's a fellow member of the AC, he had a splendid panel on sustainability. And jump in if you think I'm stating this wrong. I think the experts, and they were experts in the technologies and developers, they realized that the technologies may not really be mostly there right now when they're trying to catch up. And maybe that spurs the innovation, but I don't know if the technology is there. Is that a fair assessment? Yeah.
We have another question from a reporter from Norwood News. Apologies if this has already been covered, but could the panel please comment on the current designated AMI in New York City in terms of how HPD defines affordable housing, and if they feel the AMI levels are reasonable or should be modified?
Well, the AMI levels come from the federal government. So I'm not sure I fully understand, what they're asking. But HPD has programs. HPD is the City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, responsible for overseeing various programs that help to finance affordable housing, and they provide a lot of subsidy to help fund housing. So, I'm pretty sure that they prioritize all levels of AMI, really, from, units for formerly homeless up to 100, 120 or so % of AMI. So,
Okay.
And
I
they're
don't know if there's a follow-up to that.
and they're HB is constantly HB is
Okay, wonderful. Very last question.
One more question.
Wow.
Work for New York City Football Club on the front office, so I'm not really I guess I probably have the least amount of knowledge about real estate in this room. But as you guys may have known or heard about, there's a stadium project that was announced by Mayor Adams a couple weeks ago in the Queens, which is the main draw is the stadium, but as a part of it, 2,500 affordable housing units. I guess my broader question is what are your thoughts about it, if any, and more specific, I guess, from somebody that's not knowledgeable, why this took so long, like a 10-year process. Jed mentioned, million units short. This is 2,500 that could come in and help. Why was there such a, push and pull that took so long for this to come about?
We're all wondering that.
You familiar with the 2nd Avenue subway?
you on the other hand, you probably know more about soccer than everybody else in this room.
Some games you want to be watching.
So why do things take forever in New York is a really, really complicated question, but it's because there are lots of competing interests and the way that we've set up our land use procedures, it takes a very long time to build the consensus to move projects forward. No matter what you want to do, somebody doesn't want to do it. And you have to navigate that, and it takes a long time.
It can take years and years,
Well,
as that project and many others show. But I think one point I'd like to make about just seeing that project be announced, and there was another one recently, the Innovation Queens or QNS in Astoria, is that there seems to be more collaboration and, just more agreement between all the different parties that kind of have a say in these projects. And for me, that makes me hopeful that, we will get there and we will get projects moving in advance so that people realize that, what they may want, they aren't going to get everything, but that we have to collaborate and we have to compromise in order to build. So.
Listen, I want to wrap this up. First of all, I'd like to thank the panel, which I really appreciate because all four of the panelists have a window into this affordable housing crisis, and they are actually working on solutions of it, and they allowed us into a window to see what they're doing. I think Jed started out that he said, wait, the name of this is solving the affordable housing crisis, and he kind of chuckled. But at least when we know there's people and institutions that are aware of it and are willing to go out there, and the fact that there are banks that are willing to lend on it and they're still based it on economics, I think is a real positive thing. I really like to thank the panel. I'd like to thank our sponsors. And remember, Fordham has a great program, a master's and bachelor program in real estate, in construction, in management, in real estate finance and development. And always, if you're looking to hire, check out our job boards and who's available. I've had two people I've hired from Fordham. They've been absolutely terrific. They work hard, and you'll see they come with a lot of hitting the ground knowledge. So thank you very much, and thanks for coming out. Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.